Good morning. My name's Karl Sutton. I want to first. Nico's, I think, suggested that I would be on this panel, and I think I'm that grower that she was very patient with and cultivated. So it's an honor to actually be on this panel. I'm not young anymore. I'm middle-aged. I have a 10-year-old daughter. But at the same time, I'm still considered technically a beginning farmer, and I'm learning a lot through my challenges every year. My name's, again, Karl Sutton. My wife and I, we operate Fresh Roots Farm in Polson, Montana, and I know most people who haven't visited Montana think, wow, that's a really cold place. But that's like thinking that all of Oregon rains. So we are a smattering of microclimates, in particular in western Montana, where we're located, which we're about an hour and a quarter north of Missoula. We are really intermountain. Our climate is probably very akin to the panhandle of Idaho, yet drier. And then even within our valley, which is the Mission Valley, we're on the south end of Flathead Lake, which is 120 miles in circumference. It's bigger than Lake Tahoe. If you just go over the terminal moraine to the north of us to the lake, you're in almost zone 7. We're zone 5A, where we're situated on the southern end of the moraine next to beautiful mountains, So I had this grand idea when I decided to leave my career choices as a high school teacher and as a cooperative business developer, that I would be a market farmer in rural Montana and live on the land and sell diverse produce. And we have Western Montana Growers Cooperative, which is a producer co-op that distributes, at this point now, about $4 million in produce around the state of Montana. You know, I had this great idea. It was like, oh, we're going to do that. We're going to make good living. My wife's going to have her private practice off the farm, and that's what I'm going to do. Quickly realized that produce is a lot harder than that. It's highly competitive for small farms, and I'm just not very good at it. I don't have the temperament for it. With that being said, part of that temperament is also the location where we are. We have 15 acres with about 5 acres in cultivation. Beautiful sandy soil. And the farm, for people who went on the farm tour, they were talking about Lake Missoula on the farm tour. They took our soil. It's the very same soil profile that farmer was talking about is at our farm. It is from our farm. So our soil's not as deep, but it's really good. But we're challenged with short seasons. Our frost-free days could be from anywhere from 90 to 120 days. We're situated against mountains, so we'll get 80s up to 90s, warm days, and then cool nights, 45 to 50, because of the drainage off the mountains, which, if you're a market farmer growing tomatoes or peppers, you're not very good at it. But if maybe you're looking at seed production, brassicas, you know, they like that, and we're dry. So I learned quickly that I could not grow tomatoes very well without a lot of plastic high tunnels, and even with those, I still couldn't outrace the people that were further out in the valley that had a much better growing season than me. And then if I did catch up to them, we had way too many tomatoes. Nice thing about my location, too, is we're isolated. It's a challenge. We have a nice little isolation pocket where we're located from other market farms. Our closest neighbors are actually seed potato growers. And so it just naturally fits. So as we've been developing since 2012, I started stumbling across, this is our crop mix today. Some of them, our wheelhouse is really cool and warm season, dry seeded crops. We do a mixture of biennials as well as annuals. I know the carrot seed likes it a little hotter, but we do it really well, and we don't have Queen Anne's lace, and for the most part, our germ is really good. So even though it likes it a little hotter, we're dry, we're hot enough. I have the temperament for it, and we don't have some of the environmental considerations other places have. So the development of the seed business, and this is where Nikos comes in. I knew nothing about seed. I bought seed, didn't even think about it when I started a market farm. It was like, okay, I'm going to buy seed, I'm going to grow this, and we're going to sell produce. That's what it was. And then while I was working in cooperative business development, doing food system work, and there was an old survey that was done in partnership with our organization by the Organic Seed Alliance. It was looking at the state of organic seed back in 2008. I think that's when Kiki came up and was doing that survey work. And we had all these surveys from these growers that grew seed in Montana. I was like, who grew seed in Montana? And then as you start digging, you see there's a ripe history of seed production in Montana. Garden City Seeds out of Missoula. You have Ken Fisher over at Bozeman, Belgrade area that's produced Fisher's earliest sweet corn for one of them that you see in high mowing that came from Montana. You have Bozeman watermelon, which was a short season watermelon bred for our region. There's a history. And it was like, huh, interesting. And so with that history, as we were developing our produce farm and as I was finding out that I'm not doing that great at it, we were like, huh, we need to do something a little different. I happened to have an email and that had Nikos' name on it. And out of the blue in 2012, I sent her an email. I said, I'm just some new grower in Montana. Can I grow something for Fedco? I don't know anything. I think it was about that. And she's like, sure. She sent me Northeaster pole bean. Yeah, pole beans in Montana. They take a lot longer than bush beans, and they grew a great fresh bean. But when the weather frosted, or when frost came down, all that trellising had to come down. I had to get it covered, try to dry it out. Just say it didn't do that well. And so I think I got her like a handful of seeds. I don't know, maybe a pound out of a much bigger, like 5-pound contract, 10-pound contract. But I persisted. I was like, okay, let's try it again. So Nikos said, well, let's do that bean again. I don't know why. And then sent also pea. Well, let's try a pea at your place because it'll come off in August. Well, so as well as most of the country, there's this thing called the pea weevil. And we had these weevils. It was a beautiful crop, looked really good, until you start looking at the little caps and the weevils in it. And I happened to have access to a deep freezer. It was like minus 20. I took it all in there. I tried to freeze it out. None of it worked. So 2 years in a row, we labored through some crops that were not working for us. About that same time, there were other people in the area that Judy Auschwitz, Doug Beatty, and Antia with Wild Plum Farm, which they're longtime seed growers. They have a world of history. And there was a group of us that were starting to talk about a seed cooperative. And really with this Triple Divide Organic Seed Cooperative, it was about, one, having a place that we could all talk about seed, learn from each other. We could share equipment. We could get education programs. We had Kiki Hubbard in Missoula with OSA. Why are we not doing some education around seed in Montana? So we kind of pulled on Kiki to get into our network. And we were able to get some money raised through the Montana Specialty Crop Grant and bring some education to us. So we were able to get OSA out there. We were able to actually get Novik to come one year. And it was like all of a sudden, it was like, huh, I have some information. and we have a network. We have people with knowledge. About that same time, about 2014, Doug Beatty and his wife Antia were growing scarlet keeper carrot and Mazzata rose radish for Fedco. And Doug and Antia said, we're done with it. We don't want to do it anymore. And we were at our annual meeting at our co-op. He says, anybody want it? I do. I do. I don't know anything about it. And Doug said, I'll mentor you. And so we convinced Nikos to let me take that contract on. We knew that it could grow in our region. Doug's a lot hotter than we are, but we knew it could grow well. And I had Doug there, and I had Antia there. I had people that could support me. And so the next year, it's like almost May, Doug calls me, you planted your radish yet? I'm like, no, it's a storage radish, right? He's like, no. Got it in the ground, and from there on, it was like, oh, I can grow radish well, I can grow carrot well, these things do well, and I started learning from it. And about that same time, our seed co-op, we all agreed we'd start growing out some, kind of growing things, just start letting some vegetables actually complete their life. So I started having lettuce in the field that I would let it bolt. I had beets that were in storage. I put them in the ground. I wanted to see what a beet crop looked like in the field, and I wanted to know how to harvest it. And I started just inquiring about the crops, what they really look like when you let them go all the way through. And there was no market for it. It was about learning. And I quickly started going, this worked or this didn't work. And we started figuring that out. So it was very inquisitive along the way. And at the top, really, through this whole process of gathering information and building networks, it really was, we were building a network of communication. I was building a relationship with Nikos and Fedco. And at the same time, we were building a broader network of growers in our region that hadn't been talking in many, many years about seed. And then having the capacity of bringing in a network through OSA and other avenues to be able to bring education to us or to take us to places that we can learn from each other. So the beauty of seed is that it is, depending on the seed, it is a light storage crop. For all you people that like to have winter income with storage roots, seed is really light. And if you're contract growing, the beauty of it, it's gone. And then I can go skiing because we have winter. And I love to have my downtime. The challenge with seed is that this is my version of trying to strike a balance on the farm. It's a high risk. Seed crops are high risk. We've had a lot of failures as we're learning. And when you have those failures, one, you feel terrible that you have the failure for your buyer, but also your cash flow can look far worse because of that failure if you're counting too heavily on it. So the other challenge is, as a mixed produce grower, you would have isolation distances issues if you're growing peppos, other squashes like that. And that's an important crop for your farmer's market. So you have to consider, what am I growing if I'm a fresh market grower versus what am I growing for contract seed or for seed in any event. And then the demands on seed, I really enjoy the pace of seed. It's big plantings early on in the season, and then it's caretaking of it. But then when it's ready, you have to drop everything and go. It's not something, you can't leave it in the ground like a carrot root waiting for harvest, in the fall storage. You have to get after it, because if you're a day late and that rain comes, you're done. Or if that frost comes, or whatever events are coming, when that seed is talking to you, you have to be ready to get it at its prime, so that way it will perform the best when it's cleaned out. And it's going to save you time also in the cleaning process if you get it at the right moments. So what we've done is we have really narrowed our vegetable farm down. We grow berries, high-value crops for cash flow, which take a June, July harvest. We also, for the most part, grow pretty much carrots for bunching during the summer. But we've knocked off our income for fresh market really at the end of August. We're done. We just don't do it anymore because I know my time slot for seed is towards the end of August onward. And I have to be ready for it. We've also diversified our farm. Part of mitigating some of the financial risk of seed production, which is, again, a high-risk endeavor, as well as most farming. We diversified using our fruits to make, and people usually laugh at this, but to make popsicles. My wife laughed at me when I suggested it. And it is great because we're not competing with our seed production at all. And we get to go to music festivals and do some fun things like that. So, but looking for ways to diversify the enterprises of a business so that way it can mitigate some of the risk of seed production, but not compete with the crops that you're growing is an important factor that we've had to contend with on our farm as we're maturing. So labor versus field labor versus equipment. I'm not averse to equipment. I'm not a very good mechanic. My dad was a body man, but he always said that he was not a mechanic, and he never taught me how to work on things. So as a farmer, I have to either find good mechanics or I'm learning. But our challenge is our location. We don't have a lot of labor. And relying on employees each year, a new batch of employees, is really difficult in seed work. It's a skill, like harvesting produce is a skill. And it's very difficult to bring in new people every year to teach them that skill when they're leaving in October, and that's when you really learn. The window of learning is really that fall, how to handle, how to clean. There's so much learning going on in that moment. So we strike a balance, or try to, in our labor versus equipment. We hire one person who she has worked with us before and has ample experience in seed work and is happily coming back to our farm, which is great. And then my wife works part-time on the farm and myself. So we operate the 4 to 5 acres of total farming with that. So we have to bring in equipment. With our biennial seed crops, I've found that using a mulch layer and paper mulch with rye planted in the alleys, and then because often I heard the talk yesterday with biennials, and it's like, well, I was talking to an individual about, well, where we're located, you just pull them out of the ground, stick them in the ground behind you. Well, we don't. We store them all winter long. But I started thinking about that. I'm like, well, that's fine, but you have to weed those carrots that are in the ground a long time. We get to go 6 months without weeding because they're in storage, which is great. And then what we do in our year 2 of our biennials is we use the paper mulch because, 1, it breaks down. I don't have to remove it. 2, I don't weed. Last year with the rye, I weed eat down the alleys, and it took me about 3 hours to weed out that space, or to knock down that space, and then it was like 3 hours of hand weeding, and that was it for the season. So figuring out ways to reduce labor on your farm so that you don't have to put all that management time into your seed crops is really important. We've tooled up with the Alice Chalmers. We also transplant virtually everything that we do on the farm using a paper pot transplanter primarily for a lot of the crops because I don't have a lot of labor. And I don't want to stoop over all the time. And it works well. It addresses our short season. Oops, was that it? No, there we go. So other considerations with labor, that on the left was a great seed party we had at the place. And that was that was 2 years ago. That's the most people we've ever had on our farm, ever. And there's no way we're getting that many people back to the farm all the time for our seed work. It was great. It really reduced some of the work on that lot, but that's something we can't count on. So early on, my first year with the radish was a wood box and a back of a sledgehammer late at night because I was working during the day off the farm. And after about 40 hours of doing that, I realized that was not going to work. So a friend of mine, his brother worked for a company, and I was able to get this little lab-size thresher. It works well, slow still, but at least it's not a sledgehammer. But as I've figured out what we do well, we were able to acquire this belt thresher, which works very well for some of the crops that we're doing. Carrots, beets, those crops, and they're large enough lots that it made sense to purchase that and to fix it up. But the issue with equipment is that it breaks. So how do you deal with that? You fix it all the time. With our seed co-op, we were able to get some funding through the Montana Specialty Crop Grant to purchase a winnow wizard, as well as AGM 224 clipper and screens. So this is for shared use. The clipper's on a trailer. The winnow wizard is stationary at my farm just because we don't want to move it around a lot because it is wood and we don't want to have it break because our distances are pretty long. But we found ways to be able to bring equipment to the farm to make things more efficient and to try to share some of that amongst us farmers that are very spread out. So this is getting close to wrapping up my presentation, but I want to talk about, I'm learning to be kind to myself more and more. I feel really guilty when I have crop failures. Take it personally. And I feel really bad when I have to tell Nikos that I have a crop failure. But I do tell her, and I tell her early. Maybe I tell her really often, this is not going to work. And she keeps trusting me. So, but learning to, part of seed farming is having challenges. It's just inevitable. And being able to problem solve with either on your own or with a group or with a network is really important, but also being able to accept the fact that it's not always going to work and have the ability to be able to absorb some of those losses and financial losses, but take away from that lessons that you can carry over for future years. So the tale of a squash. 3 years ago, we started growing a zucchini for Fedco, and we had a bumper crop. It was like double yield. It was great. I was like, this is a great crop. I'm like, I want to do this all the time. I'm like, let's, just like poker player, it's like, let's double down. Let's go bigger. Well, 2 years ago, we had a very cold summer, and we got a quarter of our yield on double the planting. So maybe if you average out the 2 years, we got about what we should have had for each year. But I was like, okay, maybe it's an anomaly. So last year, of course, summer was, for a lot of us, was really challenging, really wet, not very warm, not a lot of pollinators. I think my yield was even worse last year than the year before. So, 2 bad years, 1 good year. I need to know when to say no. And I think it's something that I've learned from having these challenges, but as a seed grower, you want to get contracts because they're offering it to you, feeling like, I need to grow my business. I've got to grow my business. I want that relationship. If I say no, they're not going to give me another one. But you also have to understand that if you do have these crop failures, they're not going to give you another one. So it's a line that you have to work and constantly build with your representative that you're working with. But also realize that that was a big cost. Like, I would have made more money not planning it because there was the cost of growing it. And so learning what works for your farm and where you're at. And that's probably my greatest takeaway from these challenges is that, okay, learn what I can do well, and then experiment on the side like I did in the very beginning, growing some things out just to see how they will do, and then going the next year or 2 years later and saying, look, I can do these really well. Let's work on a contract. So as you're growing your business, you can continue growing it without taking a contract on. Just put some things on the side and just observe it and learn from it, and then come back the next year and try to get that contract.
I do want to interrupt and say he did tell me he's not doing the zucchini again this year. He learned.
Or ever again. It's a lot of scooping stuff. The last one, and we'll go into this more, there's the afternoon one, which I'm presenting on, some enterprise budgets, but they're really surprising, and I just really want to plug. I think if I was starting over, I would probably really taken better notes on what it costs to produce things and really started to drill down early on in my business planning, because it's surprising information. It's really easy to gather. Most of us have phones on us. I have an email account for farm records. I just do a quick, kind of stopwatch, catch some information, take a picture of the crop. I email it to myself. Then in winter, I know the day and month that I sent it. I know all the information, and I use all that information for building these enterprise budgets, also for my organic record keeping, or for communicating with the seed buyers. It's a great piece of technology that, for most of us that have good Wi-Fi connection in the fields, is really easy and helpful, because most of us are carrying phones out there, probably, these days. But I just wanted to look at one crop that we grew last year, Bachelor Buttons, and this one I didn't intend originally to take notes on, but I did, and did really well. 90+ germ, great yield, a lot of learning on how to harvest it. We tried several different strategies of harvesting. The labor costs are extremely high on harvest if it's not I think yesterday in the flower discussion they were talking about, Frank talked about this as a meadow type flower because it's probably better for combining. But with that being said, we were in the negative despite a really good crop. If we look at that crop in isolation at $219.39 in the hole for that crop. Can't really work in the negative on my scale. And that was at our at $36 a pound. So here's the takeaway from it. If you grow it really well and you have a relationship with your buyers and you know your numbers and you say, I need this to continue doing this, that crop, if it's at $75 a pound, is now over $1,100 net. That's a big difference. They're still getting a great product from us, high germ, they probably can carry it out over multiple years, and we're making a living. And I think these enterprise budgets can be a great strategy to build that communication with your seed buyers, because oftentimes they might not know what the cost of production on some of those are.
Is your labor included in that budget?
Yes, all labor.
You're getting paid still.
Yes. Any labor that went into that, all labor. And that's at a fair rate. This is not, this is at a fair rate.
So when you get your profit there, it's for the farm, not for you.
Yeah, that's net profit for the farm. My labor counts, everything. The twist tie to ship that thing to the buyer is in there. So it's important to know your numbers because that will help with the communication. And not only what you can grow well, how it performs, but also what it costs is really important for that relationship, I think. We'll see. I'll tell you in 2 years.